Here we're going to take a look at smart filters. Before we actually look at a smart filter, I want to show you a regular filter. You've seen this image before. I have the runner layer over here on the layers palette, and you see that runner layer has a layer mask attached to it. Below it is the background layer, which is this city. I've targeted the runner layer, and I'm going to go to the filter menu, down to stylize, and over to oil paint. And then I get some options here, and you'll notice all I see are these checkerboards. That's because it's looking in an area where there isn't any pixels. If I click on this and zoom out, at some point in time, I'm going to be able to see where she is and move her over. And if I want to see what the effect is going to do, now I can move up. And you can see kind of what this effect is going to cause. As I dial the sliders up, it's going to get more obvious. So maybe I like this. I'll hit OK. Now, I got to tell you, I'm not sure why anybody would do that from a design perspective. I don't know, maybe, but there certainly doesn't seem any legit reason to do that. But take a look, she's got this filter effect. And the point I want to make here is that this is destructive. If I was to save this file, there would be no way I could get it back if we didn't like this effect, if the client didn't like the effect. So I'd have to do the whole thing over again. What I want to do instead of this kind of destructive editing is I want to do it non-destructively, and in order to do that, I have to use a smart filter, and in order to use a smart filter, I have to have a smart object. So I'm going to step backwards a couple, Command Z, and now I'm going to make a smart object. Let me zoom out a bit. I'm going to make a smart object out of the runner layer. Now, before I do, I got to warn you, something is going to happen that maybe we haven't seen before, because this layer has a layer mask. If I go to right click, choose convert to smart object, it is going to do that. We've seen that before, but watch what happens to the mask. It is gone. There is no mask. Or so you think. The mask is actually there, but it's embedded. It's not showing you. Photoshop is not showing you the mask right now. If you really want to see the mask, you've got to double click on this, and it's going to open this up in a separate file. Notice it says runner.psb. You are actually now looking at the embedded image, the image that's inside Photoshop that has been made into a smart object, and you can actually do some editing. A lot of times, graphic designers will come over here, go to the layer mask, and use black or white, grab a black paintbrush and zoom in on it and maybe adjust an area or two to fix the mask a little bit. So they might add a little bit or subtract a little bit. And when they do and they close it, I'll do something crazy just so you can see what I mean. If I paint with black, it's going to hide the pixels. So notice I'm hiding pixels right there. I'm actually painting on the mask in the embedded PSB file. And I'm doing something silly right here, hiding those pixels. There's probably no reason to really do that. But once I'm done, I close it. It's going to say, hey, do you want to save it? I save it. Now I'm back into my original image. And notice I don't see the layer mask, but I see the effect that I did when I went to the embedded image, the PSB file, and edited that. So I want to show you that. I'm going to undo that. Now we're back to kind of where we were a moment ago, where I have this smart object. I don't see the layer mask, but it's there. It's just embedded. Now, when I go to the filter menu, down to stylize, over to oil paint, and do what I did before, I'm going to crank this up a bit, and I'm not going to try to resize it here to see it. And I hit OK, and it's going to apply that filter effect. And I'll zoom in and pan And there you can see that filter effect looks pretty much what we saw before. But look over in my layers palette. Whoa! Now there is the Smart Filters sub layer. And as you can see, I can turn the eyeball on and off. Notice when I turn the eyeball off, wham! That is awesome. I haven't done any damage to the pixels. It is non-destructive. Now I turn it back on and there you go. That's really cool. Now, I don't know why I would do that, but let's say you want to do that. Something I probably would do rather than this is to try to make this look a little bit more realistic. I'm going to turn off that oil paint filter here. I might do a smart filter to the background, because when we're dealing with foreground and background, to make something look realistic, usually what's in the foreground is more in focus and what's in the background is a little bit more blurry. But since this is a composition of two separate images, the photo of the background was the focus of the buildings. The photo of the woman was the focus of the woman. And now when I put them together, both are in focus, if that makes sense. So I'm going to take this background image and I'm going to make it into a smart object. I right click it, convert to smart object. It's now a smart object. I'm going to name it buildings. Now I'm going to go to the filter and I'm going to choose blur, and this time I'm in a Gaussian blur. By the way, notice there are some things that aren't available with smart filters. Not very many, but there are some. So here, Gaussian blur, I do that, and notice I get a preview here of what the background looks like. Maybe that's a little bit too much blur. Maybe I'll dial it down to about 4. There you go. Hit OK. And notice on my layers palette, it adds that Gaussian blur smart filter. And that looks maybe a little bit more realistic. I can turn off the eyeball. That's in sharp focus. Now it's a little bit more blurry. If you say, hey, Steve, that's a little bit too blurry, no problem. Non-destructive. Double click on the Gaussian blur and I dial it down. And there we go. Maybe that looks better. And you kind of compare it, and yeah, that looks pretty darn good. So what do you think? There are smart filters attached to smart objects.